I have to ask, what is the reaction of the Clinton campaign to these DNC leaked emails suggesting that top officials, including the CFO there, were actively discussing ways to hurt Bernie Sanders in the primaries?
What's disturbing to us is that experts are telling us that Russian state actors broke into the DNC, stole these emails, and other experts are now saying that the Russians are releasing these emails for the purpose of actually helping Donald Trump.
You're basically suggesting that Russians hacked into the DNC and now are releasing these files through WikiLeaks to help elect Donald Trump.
For a second day, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, Robbie Mook, accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of meddling in the U.S. election.
What the experts said when this breach initially happened at the DNC was that they believed that it was Russian state actors.
The experts he's citing include an outside group hired by the DNC to investigate the cyber intrusion. Neither the Clinton campaign, the White House, nor lawmakers briefed on the hack definitively linked the leak to the Russian government today.
And what I've suggested, if now, because he's the nominee for the party, and he's entitled to briefings from the CIA, for example, I said publicly, give him fake briefings. Pretend you're briefing him. Don't tell him anything.
It happened that it was your sister, who is the Democratic National Committee consultant, Alexandra, got an alarming message, and her emails had been hacked during this scandal. It was on the WikiLeaks, and her story was exactly about Paul Manafort, who was working with Viktor Yanukovych, currently with Donald Trump. Can you elaborate more on that story?
Yeah, well, as you know, Natalia, I have friends who are journalists who asked to speak with my sister, and I just keep saying no because right now is just not a good time for her. She is, working for the DNC right now, and she has a lot on her plate with this election. It's very much an all-hands-on-deck election. Things are extremely serious. Things are very, very scary here.
Another bombshell from the Trump campaign today, the resignation of the embattled campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, amid a wave of bad headlines and growing questions about Manafort's connections to Russia.
Manafort has business connections to two oligarchs, one Russian, one Ukrainian.
Our intelligence community just came out and said in the last few days that the Kremlin, meaning Putin and the Russian government, are directing the attacks, the hacking on American accounts to influence our election. And WikiLeaks is part of that, as are other sites where the Russians hack information. We don't even know if it's accurate information. This has come from the highest levels of the Russian government, clearly from Putin himself, in an effort, as 17 of our intelligence agencies have confirmed, to influence our election.
Report from Mother Jones claims a Russian operation has been working for years to cultivate and assist Donald Trump.
The veteran spy who I talk about in my story, he has no beef with Trump. He has no interest in helping Hillary Clinton. It seems like you can't handle the truth.
Yeah. Our nation's 17 federal intelligence agencies say that they are confident that Russia directed these cyber attacks and that they were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process.
They could not have taken place without the approval at the highest levels of the Kremlin.
That's speculation, and we've seen a lot. Well, it is speculation.
It is not speculation. You can only say speculation.
Statement of fact?
It is a statement of the intelligence community's best assessment,
okay.
and you can
quarrel with that thing.
You're going to have to move your show to RT Russian television.
Now President Obama is ordering the intelligence community to conduct a full review of Putin's meddling.
This morning, the president-elect's transition team finding itself in a war of words with America's intelligence agencies. Now, these agencies, according to two new published reports, have concluded that Russia was deliberately working to sway the election towards Trump.
This morning, the Washington Post reporting that a secret CIA report found Russia interfered in the U.S. election to help Donald Trump win the White House.
The Central Intelligence Agency is confident that a Russian hacking plot tried to influence the U.S. presidential election in favor of Donald Trump.
The evidence that the Russians were trying to influence the U.S. election dates back to mid-June, when private emails, opposition research, and campaign information stolen from the Democratic National Committee appeared online.
The CIA has concluded that Russia intervened in the election to help you win the presidency. your reaction.
I think it's ridiculous.
Every major U.S. intelligence agency concluding that Russia did, in fact, interfere with the election.
17 U.S. intelligence agencies reached a consensus back in October that the Kremlin had orchestrated hacks of Democratic Party organizations and individuals in the United States.
You would really have to, I think, be willing to blind yourself to the fact that all of the and I'm cabined by only talking about the public information, but all of the disclosures, all of the dumping of information was uniformly designed to hurt Secretary Clinton and help Donald Trump.
And now the Clinton campaign is backing a demand from Electoral College electors who are asking for a full intelligence briefing on the matter ahead of their official vote on December 19th.
Essentially, they should be given that security clearance so that they can be party to whatever these investigations find out and uncover about Russians' involvement in this election. And
The DNC was hacked. Everybody knew that. We knew WikiLeaks was coming out, drip by drip by drip. They wouldn't do it all at once, of course, because they were coordinating this, obviously, with the Trump folks and the Russians.
Just to clarify, did he say that the Russians were coordinating with the Trump campaign?
Based on uniform intelligence assessments, the Russians were responsible for hacking.
Officials have told CBS News that American intelligence agencies believe Putin at some point was directly involved in the hacking around the election, and they believe Putin approved spreading the information.
My primary concern was making sure that the integrity of the election process was not in any way damaged. At a time when anything that was said by me or anybody in the White House would immediately be seen through a partisan lens. I wanted to make sure that everybody understood we were playing this thing straight, that we weren't trying to advantage one side or another.
Today, the private cybersecurity company that first uncovered the DNC hack unveiled new details that they claim confirm the Russian military intelligence service was behind the computer breach. Here to explain all of this is Dmitry Alperovich. He's the co-founder of CrowdStrike, the company that did the investigating. We want to point out, and we said earlier, your company was the one that uncovered this in the first place. You were working for the Democratic National Committee. Are you still doing work for them?
We're protecting them going forward. The investigation is closed in terms of what happened there, but certainly we've seen that campaigns, political organizations are continuing to be targeted, and they continue to hire us and use our technology to protect themselves.
I ask you that because if there's any question of a conflict of interest, how do you answer that?
Well, this report was not about the DNC. This report was about a new investigation we've uncovered about what these Russian actors were doing in eastern Ukraine in terms of locating these artillery units of the Ukrainian army and then targeting them. So what we just did is said that it looks exactly the same to the evidence we've already recovered from the DNC, linking the two together.
So WikiLeaks, the organization that produced these leaks about the Democrats in the election, founded by Julian Assange, he told me in an interview last fall, he reiterated just in the last couple of days, that WikiLeaks did not get this information from the Russians or from any state actor. So how does that square with what you're saying?
Well, he's not exactly a bastion of truth and integrity.
Russians did not give him the info. Assange told Fox News yesterday he was certain Russia wasn't behind the hacking.
The intelligence briefing on so-called Russian hacking was delayed until Friday. Perhaps more time needed to build a case. Very strange. Intelligence sources tell CBS News the meeting was always planned for Friday.
Take on the intelligence community. They have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
This was a multifaceted campaign. The hacking, classical propaganda, disinformation, fake news.
There is overwhelming consensus in the community and overwhelming evidence supplied by the community that Russia did engage in an effort to impact on the elections.
Intelligence officials have concluded that there was some effort on the part of the Russian leadership to boost the Trump candidacy.
The statement that was issued by the intelligence community in October of 2016, before the election, making clear that Russia was interfering in our election, represented the consensus view of 17 different intelligence agencies. That's not usually the way intelligence works. that kind of unanimity of opinion, particularly when the stakes are so high, is notable. I think it's an indication that the intelligence community is following more than their gut instinct.
The heads of the FBI, CIA, NSA, and the Director of National Intelligence will meet face-to-face with President-elect Donald Trump today to brief him on their findings about Russian cyber attacks.
Have you ever seen a dynamic like this where an incoming president or even a sitting president has expressed such an amount of distrust for the intelligence community?
Matt, I've been in public service for over 50 years. I have never seen anything like this.
U.S. intelligence has concluded that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his military to help Donald Trump win the election. Today, the Director of National Intelligence took the unusual step of releasing an unclassified version of an investigation that details computer hacking, propaganda, and fake news articles.
The intelligence community says we have the proof. We have concrete evidence that links Russia to this DNC hacking. Do you think that it's going to be good enough for Donald Trump?
U.S. intelligence officials are heading into this afternoon's meeting at Trump Tower united in their belief that the Russians meddled in the U.S. election. A senior law enforcement official tells CBS News simply, Russia did this. Now the question is whether Mr. Trump will believe that assessment. The report will also show U.S. intelligence agencies have identified the actors or go-betweens who delivered stolen Democratic emails to WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange.
The president-elect sitting down with the spy masters, America's most senior intelligence officials, hearing their unequivocal assessment that Vladimir Putin ordered the hack of the U.S. election with the intention of electing Trump. And still, Donald Trump doesn't seem to buy.
I'll be honest with you, George. One of the things that I am concerned about is the degree to which we've seen a lot of commentary lately where there were Republicans or pundits or cable commentators who seem to have more confidence in Vladimir Putin than fellow Americans because those fellow Americans are Democrats.
It is beyond time for the president-elect to accept the obvious. Everyone else has. And if this report and presentation was enough to convince him, nothing will be.
Our forensics folks would always prefer to get access to the original device or server that's involved. So it's the best evidence.
Were you given access to do the forensics on those servers?
We were not. We were a highly respected private company, eventually got access and shared with us what they saw there.
I committed to President-elect Trump that my administration would ensure the smoothest possible transition, just as President Bush did for me.
Is it common for the president or the president-elect to be briefed on something that has not been verified? Is that common?
So it is not common. It's uncommon.
But you just published fake news.
We just published a dossier. No, I think that's a really...
Why is that not a fair, why is that an unfair description?
This was a real story about a real document that was really being passed around between the very top officials of this country.
U.S. officials believe that, saying they think Putin ordered the hacking of the Democratic Party in part because he feared Clinton would be tougher to deal with than Trump.
Donald Trump likened them to Nazis in an early morning tweet and later at his first post-election news conference. It all started back during the campaign when a former British intelligence officer, acting as a private investigator, asked his Russian sources for dirt on Mr. Trump. He collected 35 pages of it, including tales of financial and sexual misbehavior, but no evidence that any of it was true. U.S. intelligence then condensed the private eye's notes and gave them to the president-elect, and the leaders of Congress.
The chief of the DNI, James Clapper, says, and I wanted to quote him, he said, the intelligence community has not made any judgment that the information of this document is reliable, and we did not rely upon it in any way for our conclusions. Given that they have no judgment as to whether it's reliable, would you have included it in your briefing?
Clapper made clear he does not believe that the leak of a 30-page list of unverified activities came from the intelligence community. In fact, he said it is not a U.S. intelligence document.
It's all fake news. It's phony stuff. It didn't happen.
President-elect Donald Trump forcefully denied he or his campaign staff were influenced by the Russians, directing his ire at U.S. intelligence.
I think it was disgraceful that the intelligence agencies allowed any information that turned out to be so false and fake out. That's something that Nazi Germany would have done and did do.
As for that former British spy, authorities tell ABC News tonight he's considered a trusted source who's been helpful with past FBI investigations.
The Senate Intelligence Committee now says it will investigate possible links between Trump's campaign and Russia.
I was put in touch with a former counterintelligence officer, not from an American intelligence service, but from a Western intelligence service, came to the conclusion from talking to his sources that for 5 years or so, Russian intelligence had an active program to, as he put it, co-opt or cultivate Donald Trump.
U.S. investigators say that they have corroborated some of the communications detailed in a 35-page dossier compiled by a former British intelligence agent.
The FBI and U.S. intelligence agencies are looking into whether Trump campaign officials and other associates had repeated contact with and coordinated with Russian intelligence before the election.
The FBI is already investigating Russian ties of some former Trump campaign officials, including one-time campaign manager Paul Manafort.
Also included in the FBI's investigation, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort.
I was urging my former colleagues and frankly speaking, the people on the Hill, it was more actually aimed at telling the Hill people, get as much information as you can, get as much intelligence as you can before President Obama leaves the administration, because I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people who left. So it would be hidden away in the bureaucracy, that the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff's dealing with Russians, that they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to that intelligence. So I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew that there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to also help get information to the Hill.
A lot going on today.
Yeah.
Mark,
that's why you have the leaking.
Exactly.
People are worried.
Just found out that Obama had my wires tapped in Trump Tower. Nothing found. Minutes later, he asked, is it legal for a sitting president to be wiretapping a race for president? A new low.
No president can order a wiretap. Those restrictions were put in place to protect citizens from people like you.
For the part of the national security apparatus that I oversaw as DNI, there was no such wiretap activity mounted against the president-elect at the time, or as a candidate, or against his campaign.
If the FBI, for instance, had a FISA court order of some sort for a surveillance, would that be information you would know or not know?
Yes.
You would be told this?
I would know that.
If there was a FISA court order?
Yes, something like this, absolutely.
And at this point, you can't confirm or deny whether that exists?
I can deny it.
There is no FISA court order?
Not to my knowledge.
Of anything at Trump Tower?
No.
We're hearing from James Clapper and others there wasn't a FISA warrant, but if there was, that would mean that the government believed that there was illegal activity happening in or around the Trump organization, which would be very, very damaging for this president.
The FBI has asked the Department of Justice to publicly deny the wiretapping allegations, which DOJ has not done.
Right.
What does this suggest to you?
The wiretapping has been discussed in the New York Times, BBC, Fox News, and we believe that it should be looked at by the House Intelligence Committee.
I have got to stop you right there. Every single article you just mentioned does not back up the president's claim that President Obama had him wiretapped. One of them, based on anonymous sources, says there might have been a court-ordered FISA wiretap. That has been denied by the former director of national intelligence.
I think the bigger question here is let's let the House Intelligence Committee do its job, George.
That is not true.
They committed over the weekend.
Sarah, hold on a second. Hold on a second. That is not true. There's a world of difference between an illegal wiretap ordered by a president and a court-ordered wiretap approved by a federal judge. There's a world of difference between those two things.
The people in the media continue to report a false narrative that there are connections between the Trump campaign and the Russians when there simply aren't. All we're asking is the same fair deal here, that the House Intelligence Committee is given the opportunity to investigate, review this, and see if there's anything there,
Sarah,
which we believe there is.
It is not a fact that this has been done. You do not know that it is a fact that this has been done, and that has been denied by President Obama, by the former director of national intelligence, and now we know it as well by the FBI director. They are all saying it did not happen. So is the president calling all three of those individuals liars?
Do you think he just made this up? That's what I think.
Yeah.
What do you think he did?
Yeah. There's no evidence of it. And Chris, if there was any sort of wiretapping, it's because the FBI and the Department of Justice got a federal judge to sign off on it, which means he's in real trouble.
With respect to the president's tweets about alleged wiretapping directed at him by the prior administration, I have no information that supports those tweets, and we have looked carefully inside the FBI. The Department of Justice has asked me to share with you that the answer is the same for the Department of Justice and all its components. The FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts.
There is circumstantial evidence of collusion. There is direct evidence, I think, of deception.
And the way I've described it is there is circumstantial evidence, certainly, of collusion or coordination. There has been direct evidence of deception, but you can certainly prove many cases on the basis of circumstantial evidence, so people shouldn't underestimate the power of that.
I recently confirmed that on numerous occasions the intelligence community incidentally collected information about U.S. citizens involved in the Trump transition. Details about U.S. persons associated with the incoming administration, details with little or no apparent foreign intelligence value, were widely disseminated in intelligence community reporting. Third, I have confirmed that additional names of Trump transition team members were unmasked. And fourth and finally, I want to be clear, none of this surveillance was related to Russia or the investigation of Russian activities or of the Trump team.
I think it gravely concerning to the members of the committee that the chairman would receive information that is pertinent to the scope of our investigation, and instead of sharing that information with the committee, would share that information with the White House.
All you have right now is a circumstantial case.
Actually, no, Chuck. I can tell you that the case is more than that, and I can't go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence. Despite the unanimous conclusion of the 17 entities that make up the U.S. intelligence community that the Russian government sought to sow discord in our political process and undermine the Clinton campaign, there is a seeming hesitancy to dig too deeply into possible collusion.
I never mentioned leaking, I never mentioned hacking. So all I was saying to the Obama people and to the people on the Hill was make sure you share the data, the facts, whatever facts you have on this. And it wasn't advocating for anybody tapping, leaking, spying, anything of that nature.
If we are going to look at whether proper immunization procedures were followed vis-a-vis the transition team, we can't have a member of that transition team, I think, doing the oversight. So in those two areas, I think it makes sense for the chairman to recuse himself.
Now we're going to dig into that story about Obama National Security Advisor Susan Rice and the questions over how and why she unmasked Trump administration officials named in intelligence reports.
Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice has emerged as the central figure in President Trump's long-running claims that President Obama either ordered or tolerated some form of surveillance of Mr. Trump and his associates, and the motives were more about politics than national security.
The allegation is that somehow Obama administration officials utilized intelligence for political purposes. That's absolutely false. And I think it's important for people to understand what incidental means. It's an established process for senior national security officials to ask for the identity of U.S. persons in these reports. The Americans who were talking to those targets may have been picked up.
The Washington Post today calls the latest claims about Susan Rice anatomy of a fake scandal ginned up by right-wing media and Trump. And on this program tonight, we will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise, nor will we aid and abet the people who are trying to misinform you, the American people, by creating a diversion.
The Washington Post is reporting tonight that the FBI obtained a secret FISA court order last summer to monitor the communications of Carter Page.
What the FBI did was obtain a FISA warrant to basically monitor the communications of Carter Page.
The Washington Post says a judge agreed there was reason to believe Carter Page was acting as an agent of Russia.
To monitor Carter Page, FBI agents had to provide evidence to a secret court, indicating that the former Trump campaign advisor was acting as a foreign agent.
A FISA warrant has been issued. It is a very, very, very serious matter.
They had to present this evidence to a court, to an independent court. They had to be convinced that this at least was evidence worthy of investigation. So what could they have been thinking of?
Well, there was tons of false evidence, whether primarily related to that dodgy dossier, which Senator Harry Reid last August sent to Director Comey.
The FBI used a controversial dossier of alleged contacts between President Trump and Russian agents as evidence for a secret surveillance warrant.
Tonight, CNN has learned that British and European intelligence intercepted communications between Trump associates and Russian officials and other Russians known to Western intelligence during the U.S. presidential campaign, and shared those communications with their U.S. counterparts.
The FBI Director James Comey has cited the dossier in some of his briefings to members of Congress in recent weeks as one of the sources of information that the Bureau used to bolster its investigation.
As you know, the IC was a coordinated product from 3 agencies, CIA, NSA, and the FBI, not all 17 components of the intelligence community. The 24 or so analysts for this task were hand-picked, seasoned experts from each of the contributing agencies.
The president informed Comey that he's been terminated and removed from office. President Trump, it says, acted based on the clear recommendations of both the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, as well as the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions.
An enormous abuse of power by the President of the United States.
The FBI creating a special unit in Washington, not at the Washington field office, but at Washington FBI headquarters, to oversee this investigation overall. That does not happen with every investigation. That does not even happen with any major investigation.
Even as of last night, he was saying, if it is the Russians, if we don't know it's the Russians, 17 intelligence agencies said it was the Russians.
I think in many ways our institutions are under assault, both externally, and that's the big news here is the Russian interference.
That the director all but confirmed the fact that the Bureau relied on the dossier to obtain a FISA warrant.
Remind viewers why that would be so significant.
Well, it would be significant because it would show that not only did the Bureau believe that the dossier had some credibility, but that a federal judge found probable cause to believe that somebody was an agent of a foreign power, and they predicated that on the veracity of that dossier.
I've helped both the FBI and CIA on other things in the past. We've had tens of hours of discussions, and I've spent a lot of time in Langley previously. So.
Wait,
it's been an ongoing dialogue.
Why have you been spending a lot of time with the FBI and CIA over the years?
Sometimes you're asked. I mean, I think it's pretty well known.
No, not sometimes you're asked. I've never. Why, asked for what? Why?
It is very often the agencies ask for background on things that are happening around the world, and very often I've offered insight.
We have major breaking news right now. The U.S. Justice Department has just named a special counsel in the Russia investigation. Let's go right to our justice correspondent, Pamela Brown. This is huge, Pamela.
This is a significant step. We are learning that the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, has appointed former FBI Director Bob Mueller to now oversee the Russia probe and look at the possible connections between Trump campaign associates and Russia.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, I was convinced in the summer that the Russians were trying to interfere in the election. And they were very aggressive. It was a multifaceted effort. And I wanted to make sure that we were able to expose as much of that as possible.
Did you find direct evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Putin in Moscow while you were there?
By the time I left office on January 20th, I had unresolved questions in my mind as to whether or not the Russians had been successful in getting U.S. persons involved in the campaign or not to work on their behalf, again, either in a witting or unwitting fashion.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
When I was appointed FBI director in 2013, I understood that I served at the pleasure of the president. Even though I was appointed to a 10-year term, which Congress created in order to underscore the importance of the FBI being outside of politics and independent, I understood that I could be fired by a president for any reason or for no reason at all. So I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter.
In a remarkable admission, Comey revealed he did it to impact the investigation he was no longer in charge of.
I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
So if that report is correct, this email disclosed to the Trump campaign the truth that the Russian government had damaging information, that they wanted to help elect Donald Trump.
Complete double standard that we've seen out there, where we saw there was absolutely collusion between the DNC going and sitting down with the Ukrainians to try to dig up information on President Trump.
I will say this, it's not apples to apples. It just isn't apples to apples here, but it doesn't mean that what happened with the Ukrainians isn't also some type of fruit. It may be, maybe a cherry or a cranberry, but this consultant to the DNC, according to Politico, did have, interaction with the Ukrainians. It's just at a different.
But isn't that a red herring?
As well. Now, let me be clear. Let me be real clear here. That's a red herring. This notion of looking at why this whole investigation began into the possibility of conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russians. We had career people going through the FISA court.
The Ukrainian government was giving information to the DNC and to Hillary Clinton's people on who? Donald Trump. So we're acting as this doesn't happen like
so
happens
let's look
in the
at
vacuum.
it.
But
Let's look at it very quickly.
Yeah.
Ukraine is not Russia, okay?
Well, wait a minute.
You can get Oppo research from whoever you want.
Wait a minute.
But if you solicit information from a foreign government, let alone a hostile one, you could be in trouble with the FEC. But again, I don't want to talk about legality. That's not my place.
You just said that if it's the Ukrainians, it's okay. If it's the Russians, it's not. That's not the law. And you know that, and I know.
And tonight, in fact, 2 new bombshells have just dropped. One is from CNN and one is from the New York Times. The New York Times reports tonight, just within the last couple of hours, that the president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, has been informed by federal prosecutors that they intend to indict him.
Hard to understand the conduct of the people around Donald Trump unless they're really guilty. And what you're seeing here is increasing evidence that Paul Manafort committed federal crimes. They would not have been able to get that wiretap without some suspicion that he was a foreign agent. And that's why the FBI got the renewed wiretap in 2016.
That same man, Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, has been extensively wiretapped by law enforcement officials, both before and after last year's presidential election.
And CNN is reporting this morning that U.S. investigators wiretapped Manafort under secret court orders before and after the 2016 election. Manafort was forced to resign as Trump's campaign manager in August of 2016 amid scrutiny over his business relationships with pro-Russian figures.
What does it mean? What are the implications of what we see happening in Paul Manafort's case?
That he has information to pressure Manafort and can use that information as a can opener to go and get whatever it is that he wants and make Manafort talk.
Investigators have multiple wiretap conversations between Manafort and Russian individuals. The intercepts were part of a wide-ranging FBI counterintelligence operation.
Investigators got a FISA warrant to wiretap Manafort before and after the election. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I can't comment on a specific FISA order. I said some things about this on Meet the Press on the 5th of March, and I stand on that statement. I will say that for the part of the national security apparatus that I oversaw as DNI, there was no such wiretap activity mounted against the president-elect at the time, or as a candidate, or against his campaign.
The president's allies say that the fact that Manafort was wiretapped proves that the president was right to accuse the former president of wiretapping him, and you were wrong. What's your response?
Well, I stand on that statement that you just replayed.
If the FBI, for instance, had a FISA court order of some sort for a surveillance, would that be information you would know or not know?
Yes.
You would be told this?
I would know that.
If there was a FISA court order?
Yes. And I cannot comment on the media reporting, which is all we have, about a FISA warrant allegedly lodged against Mr. Manafort. I can't comment on that. I will simply reiterate what I said in March, and I stand on that. I can deny it.
There is no FISA court order?
Not to my knowledge.
Of anything at Trump Tower?
No.
There is, as far as Trump Tower being wiretapped, according to the president, you say what?
I stand on what I said on the 5th of March on Meet the Press, as you just replayed it. There was no such wiretap activity.
Did you know about a FISA warrant against Paul Manafort at the time?
I did not.
If the FBI, for instance, had a FISA court order of some sort for a surveillance, would that be information you would know or not know?
Yes. Commenting on, FISAs are classified. And so, even if I knew something about it, I couldn't, and I don't. And I will just conclude by saying I stand on what I said on the 5th of March. I can deny it.
There is no FISA court order?
Not to my knowledge.
Is it possible the president was picked up in a conversation with Paul Manafort?
It's certainly conceivable. Yeah,
is it likely?
I can't say. I wouldn't want to go there, but I will say it's possible.
Knowing that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party funded the research behind the Christopher Steele dossier for those 6 months last year, does that shed any meaningful light in your committee's investigation into the Russian attack or whether they had help?
Not particularly, no. But it doesn't really shed any light where we really need light shed, and that is how much of what Mr. Steele found can be corroborated, how much of it is accurate. We've been working hard to answer those questions, which are really what the American people need to know. And indeed, some of the dossier has been corroborated, but I don't think it really adds much value to know who paid for it necessarily. The plain fact is sometimes what is uncovered in opposition research turns out to be true.
During last year's campaign, reporter Ken Vogel had sources telling him the Clinton campaign was helping to finance that now infamous dossier researching Donald Trump's contacts with Russians. But Vogel tweets, when I tried to report this story, Clinton campaign lawyer @Mark Elias pushed back vigorously, saying you or your sources are wrong. Well, we know today Ken's sources were right. The source now confirms to CNN a development reported last night by the Washington Post. Both the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee helped fund the dossier research.
Maggie Haberman of the New York Times went further, saying folks involved in funding this lied about it, and with sanctimony for a year.
The law firm that represented both the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary for America campaign has confirmed that it paid Fusion GPS in April of 2016 to perform a variety of research services. But eventually the FBI was interested in Christopher Steele continuing his work, so they obviously viewed him as a credible enough source to explore the potential of entering an agreement with him so that he would continue his work looking into these alleged ties between the Trump campaign and Kremlin officials.
But should they have come clean during this massive investigation with all the focus on the Russian connection of Donald Trump? Why wouldn't the Democrats come out and say, okay, we paid for it, instead of letting it leak out now when it now brings into question the whole effort? Why weren't they clean? Why did they hide this? Why did Hillary Clinton hide this?
I just want to remind our viewers, look, it's about 30 pages or something. It's obviously widely available out there. We don't talk about it because it hasn't been verified. But we have confirmed that some of the conversations as reported in this dossier between foreign nationals did occur. So some things in it appear to be true. Others are completely uncorroborated at this time.
We've heard from our sources that there are parts of this dossier that investigators are using as sort of a roadmap as they try to unravel some of these alleged connections between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives or Kremlin officials. And so this is a document that, while some of it may remain uncorroborated, there are aspects of it that investigators are finding to be quite credible.
What do you know about any warrants that might have been obtained on the basis of unverified information in the dossier?
Well, I can't speak to what warrants may or may not have been obtained. What I can tell you is, the key thing from an investigative point of view is not who began the dossier or what do we think about Christopher Steele, but rather what are we able to prove in terms of Russia's intervention? And
on that score, I think we've made a great deal of progress, and we learn more every day in terms of the Russians' hacking and dumping operation, in terms of the Russian social media operation, and indeed the issue of the connections between the Russian government and the Trump campaign.
I think with respect to the dossier itself, the key thing is, it doesn't matter who paid for it. It's what the dossier said and the extent to which it's corroborated or not. We had some concerns about it from the standpoint of its sourcing, which we couldn't corroborate. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, some of the substantive content, not all of it, but some of the substantive content of the dossier, we were able to corroborate in our intelligence community assessment, which from other sources, in which we had very high confidence level.
So when the president just refers to it as fake dossier, that is false.
I don't think that is the accurate characterization for the entirety of the dossier.
It is the biggest break in the case yet, the strongest evidence yet of possible collusion, with details of how this Trump campaign advisor, 30-year-old George Papadopoulos, worked with suspected Russian agents and then denied it to the FBI.
Are you seeing the possibility of collusion here? Are you seeing the possibility of collusion be heightened by these revelations? Or are you looking at this and saying, I see collusion right now?
Well, we certainly see a willingness on the Trump campaign at the highest levels to accept the Russian government's help to collude in that way.
And about this development that he's now been cooperating these last several weeks with the FBI, what does cooperating mean? Would we see a wiretap or other techniques they usually use?
Well, it's standard practice, David, for the FBI, whenever they get someone like this, an alleged conspiracy to secretly cooperate, to have them engage others and even wear a secret recording device, a wire. We don't know if that happened here, but it would hardly be unusual, David.
Well, a top FBI agent suspected of sending anti-Trump messages is no longer part of the team investigating Russian interference in the election. Special counsel Robert Mueller removed the agent over the summer, but we are just now learning about the move.
Well, Peter Strzok is a top FBI investigator who's been working alongside special counsel Robert Mueller. He also was a key player in the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. But it was revealed that he sent politically charged text messages to another member of Mueller's team, Lisa Page, who's an FBI lawyer. After this, he was removed from the Mueller investigation, and he now works in the FBI's HR department.
Well, Jake, sources we have learned from tell us that the electronic records show that Peter Strzok changed former FBI Director James Comey earlier draft language describing Clinton's actions in handling classified materials from, quote, grossly negligent to extremely careless.
His attacks on the intelligence community, on the assessment, the attacks on the media, this is an effort to, again, try to undermine those quarters that could pose a serious threat to him. Also, I think it shows the insecurity that he still feels about the election and how Russian interference may have contributed, in fact, to that election. So I think there's a combination of factors that are motivating the president at this time.
Do you know of any compromising material that the Russians might have on him?
I have shared everything I know with the intelligence committees.
That's not a no or a yes, because we're not privy to the information that you gave to the intelligence committees.
That's true. You know.
We identified significant inaccuracies and omissions in each of the 4 applications, 7 in the first application, and a total of 17 by the final renewal application. For example, the Crossfire Hurricane team obtained information from Steele's primary subsource in January 2017 that raised significant questions about the reliability of the Steele report. This was particularly noteworthy because the FISA applications relied entirely on information from the primary subsource's reporting to support the allegation that Page was coordinating with the Russian government on 2016 U.S. presidential election activities. All of the applications also omitted information that the FBI had obtained in August 2016, from another U.S. government agency detailing its prior relationship with Page, with Carter Page, including that Carter Page had been approved as an operational contact for that other agency from 2008 to 2013, that Page had provided information to the other agency concerning his prior contacts with certain Russian intelligence officers, and that an employee of that other agency assessed that Carter Page had been candid with them. The FBI never followed up on that information. and the FISA applications made it appear as though the evidence supporting probable cause was stronger than was actually the case.
If you read this document, the first thing you would think of is they got something on Donald Trump. It is stunning, it is damning, it is salacious, and it's a bunch of crap.